each Thursday. This new installment takes a new direction, a venture in what I call the Isaiah Project. I did indeed stand in front of the 20-foot-long Isaiah scroll in Jerusalem in the Museum of the Book in the year 2000. It was an epiphany moment, taking in a meticulous stroke of on the vellum, gauging the mind of the copyist, for whom a misstroke or a dropped letter would have been a catastrophe. Then the mind of the caretaker of the scroll, who had sealed it in a storage jar and hid it in a cave above Qumran, anxiously wondering when he might return to uncover it. More likely, given the violent circumstances of his time, he thought like the psalmist, "My soul shall live for him," a euphemism for dying. "My descendants shall serve him. They will come and make known to a people yet unborn the saving deeds that he has done." In this case, those unborn came 2,000 some years later, I for one. The sight and the thought convicted me. How vague and sketchy was my understanding of the great scroll. Mined, as it were, of gems like readings on fasting on Ash Wednesday or servanthood on Good Friday, or wine on the lees or oaks of righteousness, read at funerals. In that moment, I thought to myself, this I must own. Well, time has a way of passing, 20 years gone in a blink of an eye. It was only then that I resolved to read the original Hebrew text of the scroll in order to begin effecting an ownership. I have, in fact, completed the first read and now, still far from ownership, launching a second. I have dubbed this my last project. Very skeptic like my wife. When I see it, I will believe it. You may well doubt it. But the Isaiah text is so big and so rich and so wedded to last things that I am confident that it will be so. I'm inviting you to share in some of my discoveries thus far. To make a beginning, I would like to take you to a passage with which you are likely to be familiar. Chapter 6, verse 1. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord high and lifted up. Stop for a moment and recognize that the text has just dated itself. The year is 641 BCE, a date corroborated by historical sources outside of the Bible. This is quite unlike the dating of the Abraham saga, vaguely second millennium and unattested, or to the Exodus story, vaguely the middle of the 12th century, and then attested only by a single cryptic appearance of the name Israel in an Egyptian monument, the Myrna Pastille. This suggests that the Isaiah text can make a significant contribution to establishing the time and the manner of the origins of the biblical text, a topic which is currently hotly debated. Let me continue with our text. Seraphs were in attendance above him. One called to another and said, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The earth is full of his glory." Seraphim Adadim Ma'al Lo Sis Kanefim Va Kara Zet El Zet Va Amar Kadesh 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 Yahweh Sabaoth Melech HaEretz Kavod Do. This vision apparently takes place in the Jerusalem temple. What you need to keep in mind, however, is that the Isaiah scroll has a marginal interest in the temple. And when it is referenced, it is likely to be in a derogatory manner. This underlines for us that God is not in the temple, he is in heaven. And it is only his train, the trailing edge of God's garment, that passes through the temple. This identifies for us that the Isaiah text makes a significant advance in the doctrine of God. It moves from a henotheistic view of God to a truly monotheistic view. God is a universal, transcendent being. The king of Assyria himself is God's agent. This view is unprecedented at the time, and the Isaiah scroll goes a long ways to making it the normative understanding of the Judeo-Christian tradition. A final observation about Isaiah 6 the text underlines that it is not only familiar to us as a reading on Trinity Sunday, among other occasions, but also as embedded in our liturgical life. The earliest Eucharistic liturgies of the Church incorporated the thrice holy into its Eucharistic prayer, where it's been ever since. The Isaiah text, which was probably published in the middle of the 4th century BCE, has never been shelved, but it has continued to live in the lives of successive generations, including the age in which the copyist produced the Qumran scroll, and the age of the guardian who secured it in the jar left in the cave above Qumran, and later by Jesus, who quoted it in his teaching, by early Christian teachers who used it to explain who Christ was, and on to us frequently singing, "Holy, holy, holy." Few texts inside of the Judeo-Christian sphere, or outside of it for that matter, can make that claim. I would move now from a reflection on chapter 6 to chapter 12, which is a poem of exceptional quality and is also an Isaiah text with which you're likely to be familiar, as you may have used it as a canticle, Canticle 12 in the Book of Common Prayer, and or have sung it as a hymn at Advent. Surely it is God who saves us, 678 in the Episcopal Hymnal. Chapter 12 has a significant role in the structure of the early part of the Isaiah text. The Isaiah text opens really with chapter 3, as it is broadly recognized that chapter 1 and chapter 2 were prologues written later, added to later editions of the Isaiah scroll. Chapters 3 through 5 set out a prophetic analysis of the state of Israel. Chapter 6, as we have seen, is a prophetic vision of God at the heart of the unit. It leads to a prophetic event which takes place in Jerusalem. And then chapter 12 comes and closes the unit, affirming the saving power of God. Here is the opening line of the poem in Hebrew. Ene el yashu ti abatak walo efkat. Ki atzi va ta'amarat Yahweh ba yachili Yeshua. The Hebrew poetry is not based on rhyme, but on lineage, lines, parallels, wordplays, assonance. One might add not by meter either, but in reality we don't really know how it sounds. It is important to recognize that the alphabetic writing is only a couple of 100 years old at this time. The alphabetic writing was invented by the nearby Phoenicians in the 9th century, the age of Solomon, David, and Saul. The Israelites used Phoenician as long with or instead of Hebrew. In Hebrew, only the consonants are written. There are no punctuation marks. There are no breaks in the line. The syntax is quite spare. That said, it should be obvious that knowing what you are reading is an essential part of one's success. The text is ringing in your ear, and the letters are like prompts. It is more like a liturgical score, a musical score, than a literary text. J. Blake Covey, in his book, Reading the Poetry of First Isaiah, published in 2018, asserts that Isaiah is the most perfect model of prophetic poetry. He shows us how lineage works throughout that book, revealing poetic units. We see this in the verses above as a pattern of 6 syllables, and so on. Another element is assonance, the repetition of vowel sounds. In Flanders Field, poppies grow row on row. And consonants, the repetition of consonant sounds. A duck that clucked drove a truck into an aqueduct. In the Isaiah poem, we have an example of the word ki, kaf yod, which means for or because. And it is repeated 4 times in this short poem. Its long E sound resonates with ye, which at the end of a word like Yeshua means my salvation, or li, which means for me or mine. We're better trained in, I would perform this short poem for you, but at last I'm not a performer. I'm not accomplished in oral Hebrew. So the concluding line shall have to suffice. Ki gadol baka rava pakaba kadesh Yisrael. For the Great One is in the midst of you, the Holy One of Israel. Note the K sound is almost as good as the duck in the truck. With this poem, we are introduced to a pattern that we will find throughout the text of Isaiah. Indictment, prediction of catastrophe, followed by the conviction of hope. It also identifies a literary sophistication that runs all the way through the Isaiah text. There are throughout the Isaiah text a number of poems, and everywhere the prose is polished with assonance, consonants, and with word plays. This is another reason why the Isaiah project has become so compelling for me. It is high literary art. As we bring our session to an end, you will probably note that little has been said thus far about Isaiah, the person. That's because the text is bigger than the person, and in fact, many men and women inhabit this text. Isaiah, the son of Amos, his wife, the prophetess, his son, Sharim and Mahar, a couple of anonymous editors of exceptional intellect and spirituality, and many others. The text of Isaiah is a large house, and in it there is room for you and for me as well. I extend to you an invitation to our next First Thursday, where our talk will be The Man and the King.